Plato's Symposium is a philosophical inquiry into love. In this dialogue, the characters offer various perspectives into the concept of eros, used interchangeably to refer to the god of love or just love itself. One day, Socrates came across one of his followers, Aristodemus. Socrates was getting ready for a party that the poet Agathon was hosting to celebrate his recent victory. Socrates invited Aristodemus even though he didn't get the official invite, and Aristodemus accepted to go as his guest. Together, they went off to Agathon's party. However, on the way there, Socrates got lost in thought and insisted that Aristodemus go there first. Once he got to Agathon's place, one of the slaves led him to the dining room where the other guys were lying down on couches. Agathon saw Aristodemus and welcomed him. As it turned out, Agathon wanted to give him the invite, but had a hard time finding him. Agathon then asked where Socrates was, but Aristodemus had no idea. Agathon told one of his slaves to look for Socrates and suggested that Aristodemus share a couch with the doctor Symmachus. Once the food was served, the attendees began to feast. Shortly afterwards, Socrates arrived, and Agathon said to him, "Socrates, come lie down next to me. Who knows, if I touch you, I may catch a bit of the wisdom that came to you under my neighbor's porch." Socrates accepted the invitation and immediately started glazing him by saying how great it would be if wisdom could flow by lying next to Agathon. Being the humble man that he was, Socrates downplayed his own abilities and expressed his desire to gain Agathon's wisdom instead. After flirting with Agathon, Socrates proceeded to eat his dinner. Later, when the topic of drinking came up, Pausanias asked if they could all take it easier tonight since he was still hungover from going too hard from the previous night's festivities. Aristophanes, the comic playwright, agreed. The doctor, Symmachus, was relieved about the consensus to take it easier. Despite nobody asking, he proceeded to flex his medical knowledge by pointing out the health concerns of drinking too much alcohol and advised everyone against doing so. Phaedrus, another one of the lightweights, accepted his medical guidance. Everyone else agreed not to get too lit. Now that everyone was on the same page, Symmachus suggested sending the flute girl away and turning it into a real sausage fest. He proposed to spend the night in conversation about a particular subject. Everyone was down and they pressed him to announce the topic. Symmachus explained that the idea came from Phaedrus, who was whining the other day about how people hardly pay tribute to the god of love, Eros. Symmachus agreed with him. To make up for this lack of tribute, he proposed that they all take turns making speeches to honor the god of love. The plan would be to start with Phaedrus and go around the circle left to right. Socrates insisted that no one would be against this idea and mentioned that the art of love was the only thing that he understood. Once everyone agreed, Phaedrus began the first speech. As a side note, the remainder of this essay I'll refer to the god as love to follow the translation used for this essay. Phaedrus started his speech by saying, "Love is a great god, wonderful in many ways to gods and men, and most marvelous of all is the way he came into being. We honor him as one of the most ancient gods." He cited writers of renown and asserted that there was consensus to love being one of the oldest gods. Phaedrus explained that because love was so ancient, he conferred the greatest benefits. His account of love is already sounding questionable, but it's apparent that Phaedrus isn't focusing on philosophical rigor in his speech. His aim is to praise the god of love. At that moment, he was undecided as to whether the greatest good is a young boy having a gentle lover or the older lover having a young boy. He went on to explain that to live a good life, one needs guidance, and the greatest guidance comes from love, another questionable idea. Phaedrus clarified that by guidance he meant a sense of shame when doing bad and pride when doing good. However, I think it's worth questioning what Phaedrus has to say here. The feeling of love can amplify feelings of shame and pride, but are these really the ideal sources of guidance? And even if they were, should the development of one's character be so dependent on the opinions of others? As Phaedrus explained, a man caught acting shamefully suffers more if he is caught by the boy that he loves than by others, and vice versa. While he's been groomed for a bias towards this type of relationship, his logic can be extended to other types of lovers. It's common to feel a greater sense of judgment by the ones you love. Such feelings can inspire us to be better, but there's a risk of one's self-worth being on the whims of others. Nonetheless, Phaedrus' speech is overly optimistic and doesn't acknowledge the potential shortcomings of being guided by love. He suggested the development of a city or army made of older lovers and their beloved boys, and insisted that it would be the most effective organization. He reasoned that in this Neverland Ranch type of organization, the lovers and beloved would mutually inspire one another to become greater and prevent each other from being caught lacking. I'm not sure if such an institution has ever been created, but I have a hard time imagining them being very productive. Phaedrus states, "No one will die for you but a lover, and a lover will do this even if she's a woman." As an example, he pointed to Alcestis, a princess of Greek myth who was known for her noble sacrifice on behalf of her husband. She was eventually saved from the underworld, which Phaedrus sees as proof that the gods honored such acts of love and courage. In contrast, Orpheus, the famous bard and son of Amuse, didn't die for his love. As a consequence, his fate was to die at the hands of women, torn to pieces by the frenzied cult of Dionysus. The last example he used was Achilles, who avenged his lover Patroclus and ended up in the Isles of the Blessed. Despite knowing his fate would be to die if he slayed Hector, the murderer of his beloved companion, Achilles woke up and chose violence. Phaedrus insisted that Achilles avenging his lover delighted the gods, and he was rewarded for this. Ever the romantic, Phaedrus takes no issue with Achilles tying the dead Hector to his chariot and dragging him around for a few victory laps. He makes a point to refute the claim of Aeschylus, the famous Athenian tragic poet, that Achilles was the older lover. Phaedrus insisted that Achilles was younger and more beautiful than his lover Patroclus. Perhaps he was biased because he was a beloved young man himself. Phaedrus determined that the gods were more impressed by the younger beloved that cherishes his lover. However, I think his rhetoric is more self-serving than convincing. Phaedrus concludes, "Therefore, I say love is the most ancient of the gods, the most honored, and the most powerful in helping men gain virtue and blessedness, whether they are alive or have passed away." It sounds like he's pandering to the older lovers by depicting love as the oldest and most benevolent god. For anyone that's experienced the downsides of love, these words might come across as overly romanticized. Fortunately, there are various other perspectives in this dialogue to balance out this account of love. After Phaedrus was done, the next speech described in this dialogue was given by Pausanias. In the opening of his speech, Pausanias distinguished between two types of love. He reasoned that since there are two versions of Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, there should be two types of love because the god of love and Aphrodite are intertwined. He explained, one is an older deity, the motherless daughter of Uranos, the god of heaven. She is known as Urania, or heavenly Aphrodite. She was born without a mother because back in the day, the Titan Cronus, father of several Greek gods, fought his father Uranos, the sky deity. During this fight, he cut off his father's family jewels and threw them into the sea. All that nut from Uranos became Siphon, which became the heavenly Aphrodite. Pausanias continued, the other goddess is younger, the daughter of Zeus and Dione. Her name is Pandemos, or common Aphrodite. It follows, therefore, that there is a common as well as a heavenly love, depending on which goddess is love's partner. He insisted that to praise love, we must distinguish between these two types. He argued that love isn't inherently good. Rather, it depends on what effects love has on us, which can be either good or bad. He insisted that the love that comes from the common Aphrodite is for plebs, and says, this, of course, is the love felt by the vulgar, who are attached to women no less than to boys, to the body more than to the soul, and to the least intelligent partners, since all they care about is completing the sexual act. He explained that this lower form of love comes from the fact that the common Aphrodite is a younger goddess that was born from male and female parents. On the other hand, the higher love that arises from the heavenly Aphrodite is masculine as fuck because it came from the sky deity's own manhood. Therefore, those moved by the superior form of love are attracted to guys. As Pausanias said, they find pleasure in what is by nature stronger and more intelligent. While he voiced a strong preference for dudes, he also believed that men who are attracted to the same sex, but not motivated by the heavenly love, will go for younger boys. He asserted that the heavenly love motivates men to go for older boys with some stubble, which he calls a sign that they have begun to form minds of their own. As suspicious as his speech was, at least he draws a line at being a predator, unlike Drake. Pausanias believed that the Athenian attitude to love was superior because they were more open about their feelings and encouraged bold actions performed out of love. However, there were some exceptions to this affirmative attitude towards love. He gave the following example. Fathers hire attendants for their sons as soon as they're old enough to be attractive, and that an attendant's main task is to prevent any contact between his charge and his suitors. A boy that was too easily courted would have been roasted by his homies. He explained this to emphasize the complexity of love. He said, it is neither honorable nor a disgrace. Its character depends entirely on the behavior it gives rise to. This point shows more nuance compared to Phaedrus' blind praise of love. For example, most can agree that love is bad if it keeps you in a toxic relationship. Love can also be bad if it encourages dangerous rationalizations like when a lover thinks, I can change him. On the other hand, if love moves you to be a great person, then we can judge love to be good in that case. Pausanias clarified that the bad form of love is embodied by the common vulgar lover who loves the body rather than the soul. The man whose love is bound to be inconstant, since what he loves is itself mutable and unstable. He explained that this sort of love is fleeting because physical beauty is ephemeral. In contrast, it is better to be in love with a good character because it is more enduring. Pausanias explained that the practice of the lover openly expressing his love and the beloved playing hard to get serve the function of discerning the good from the bad. He likened this interplay to a test and asserts that if a boy were to yield to the lover too soon, it would be shameful. Pausanias also thought it would be dishonorable to be seduced by money or power, which are transient and not motivated by true love. From Pausanias' point of view, another appropriate reason to submit oneself for another is for the sake of virtue. He believed that it was completely okay to put out as long as you were doing it for wisdom or some other virtue. From this perspective, as long as you're motivated to build character, it's okay to be seeking arrangements. When a lover is motivated by these ideals, their form of love is honorable. According to Pausanias, it's not shameful to be deceived so long as the person is motivated by love. If love was not the motivation, then deception would be dishonorable for both sides. He gave an example about getting baited by a lover pretending to be rich. If the beloved only accepted him because he wanted to secure the bag, this would be shameful for him as well as the lying lover. On the other hand, if one were to give oneself to a lover thinking he was a good person and influence, Pausanias said, it is noble for him to have been deceived. Apparently, it's good to get played as long as you had noble intentions. Maybe this would be understandable if the person was just getting fooled once, but if getting finessed becomes a habit, I think most of us would agree that this is far from virtuous. Nonetheless, Pausanias doesn't make this distinction. He concluded, it follows, therefore, that giving in to your lover for virtue's sake is honorable, whatever the outcome. And this, of course, is the heavenly love of the heavenly goddess. No matter how many times the beloved gets bamboozled, it is okay because his heart was in the right place. Love that is not motivated by the desire for virtue he associates with the vulgar form of Aphrodite. At the end of his speech, he confessed that it was a hasty improvisation, which might explain its questionable quality. It was Aristophanes' turn, but he had the hiccups and was unable to start his speech. Next in line was Eryximachus, the doctor. Eryximachus started off by praising Pausanias for distinguishing between two types of love, but criticized him for not fully developing this idea. Through studying medicine, he learned that love is not exclusive to humans and occurs everywhere. He stated, love is a deity of the greatest importance. He directs everything that occurs, not only in the human domain, but also in that of the gods. Since Eryximachus was unable to go a minute without reminding everyone that he was a doctor, he turned his speech into a lecture about medicine. He stated, our very bodies manifest as two species of love. He explained that there is healthy love and there is sickly love. Similar to the practice of medicine, we must cultivate what is beneficial to us and reject what is diseased. Eryximachus stated, medicine is simply the science of the effects of love on repletion and depletion of the body, and the hallmark of the accomplished physician is his ability to distinguish the love that is noble from the love that is ugly and disgraceful. He continued by explaining that the doctor performs his duty by putting opposing elements of the body into balance. He believed that this precedent was set by Asclepius, who developed the practice of medicine by producing concord and love between such opposites. For these reasons, he asserted that the medical profession was guided by the god of love. He likened the practice of medicine to music, which also creates harmony out of discord. Eryximachus continued to explain the parallels between love and music. The heavenly form of love is inspired by Urania, the heavenly muse. This form of love is felt by good people, or by those whom such love might improve in this regard, must be encouraged and protected. Opposite of this is the common and vulgar form of love inspired by Polyhymnia, the muse of many songs. Eryximachus said, we must be careful to enjoy his pleasures without slipping into debauchery. While this resembles the black and white dichotomy of love that Pausanias depicted, Eryximachus allows for enjoyment of these common pleasures in moderation. He asserted that these two types of love are universal. For example, both types of love are manifested in the hot and cold of the seasons, the ideal temperature being somewhere in the middle. When the higher form of love is dominant, all is well in nature. However, when the lower form is in control, nature is destructive. Other examples of the universality of love are the rituals of sacrifice and divination, which bring harmony to gods and men. The root of impiety is failure to prioritize the higher form of love in pursuit of the lower form. The art of divination is to cultivate awareness of the two types of love and put them into harmony. This practice fosters love between gods and men. For these reasons, Eryximachus affirmed the power of love and insisted that it gifts us with health, happiness, and harmony. With that said, he concluded his speech. Eryximachus insisted that anything he left out was by accident and left it to the next speaker, Aristophanes, now cured of the hiccups, to complete the picture. Thanks to Eryximachus' medical proficiency, Aristophanes cured his hiccups through the sneeze treatment. Aristophanes then asserted that people haven't grasped the importance of love, and he pointed to the lack of worship of this god as evidence. Regarding the god of love, Aristophanes stated, "He loves the human race more than any other god. He stands by us in our troubles, and he cures those ills we humans are most happy to have mended." To explain the true nature of love, he took a different approach to his speech and told a myth about the original form of mankind. According to his myth, humanity was originally whole. Then we were split in half to become our current human form, and to this day we strive in life to seek our other half. This story is often romanticized as being the mythical origin of soulmates and told without mentioning that these words came from a comic playwright within a philosophical dialogue. He described the original human form as being completely round, with back and sides in a circle. They had 4 hands each, as many legs as hands, and 2 faces, exactly alike on a rounded neck. Between those 2 faces, which were on the opposite sides, was 1 head with 4 ears. There were 2 sets of sexual organs. Once you visualize how grotesque this original form was, this myth becomes a lot less rosy. The males were children of the sun, females of the earth, and the combined form came from the moon. Resembling their parents, they were spherical and moved in a spinning motion like a human bowling ball. The original humans were so powerful that the gods considered them to be dangerous. These humans even attempted to ascend the heavens and overthrow the gods. Despite this treachery, the gods weren't willing to destroy mankind because they would lose their worshippers who offered sacrifices. Nonetheless, they couldn't allow them to continue being a threat to the gods. To resolve this dilemma, Zeus cooked up a plan. Zeus's solution was to cut each person in 2, becoming our current human form, which offered the benefits of diminishing the powers of mankind and doubling the number of god worshippers. He threatened, if we ever decide to fuck around again, then we will find out how it feels to be cut in half again, condemned to live hopping on 1 leg. He proceeded with his brilliant plan, and each person was chopped in half. He then called up the god Apollo to use his powers to make some cosmetic adjustments to the newly severed mankind. Like a psychopath, Zeus requested Apollo to turn its face and half its neck toward the wound, so that each person would see that he'd been cut and keep better order. Afterwards, Apollo healed the wounds and pulled the skin together, which became the stomach. As a result of this physical division, all of mankind was incomplete and each person desired for his or her other half. If they ever managed to find their other half, they would embrace one another and refuse to separate. This was meant literally. They were so attached to each other that they started to die from starvation and sedentariness. If one half died, they would move on to another person, but the same issue persisted, so they continued to die off. Zeus realized he done fucked up. Fortunately, he was on a creative streak and cooked up another plan, which was to move everyone's private parts from the back to the front. In mankind's previous form, those parts were faced outwards, and they made children by planting their seeds in the ground. By relocating mankind's reproductive organs, he developed human reproduction through sex. Now that humanity was able to have sex, they no longer desired to cuddle all day because they achieved post-nut clarity, which allowed them to get on with their lives and become productive members of society. Aristophanes stated, "This, then, is the source of our desire to love each other. Love is born into every human being. It calls back the halves of our original nature together. It tries to make 1 out of 2 and heal the wound of human nature. Each person is missing their other half and desires reunion with them to become whole." The original fusion of man and woman were split into heterosexual men and women. The original whole women became split into lesbian women. Regarding the original whole men, Aristophanes stated, "People who are split from a male are male-oriented. While they are boys, because they are chips off the male block, they love men and enjoy lying with men and being embraced by men. Those are the best boys and lads, because they are the most manly in their nature." Like the other speakers, Aristophanes asserts that male-to-male love is superior. He refuted the negative sentiment that boys who enjoy some eggplant have no shame. Aristophanes stated that the reason for their bias for bros, bananas, and Brokeback Mountain is that they have a healthy dose of narcissism. He explained, "They are bold and brave and masculine, and they tend to cherish what is like themselves." Aristophanes claimed that these types of boys grow up to become great politicians who appreciate younger men and have little to no concern for marriage and having children. These manliest of men honor the god of love and get to enjoy the company of younger men. When the 2 halves meet, they are struck with love and bound together. Aristophanes asserted that it is not merely for the pleasures of sex that they stay together. The soul of the lover desires something deeper than that. He thought that if Hephaestus gave people the option to be literally weld together so that they would exist as one throughout life and even after death, no person would refuse. That sounds like an absolute nightmare. Nonetheless, this is the logical outcome of his myth because by being bound together, the two halves become a whole person. As Aristophanes said, love is the name of our pursuit of wholeness, for our desire to be complete. Aristophanes explained the moral of the story. We should revere the gods, or else we will get sawn in half again. As long as we follow the guidance of love, we can avoid punishment and achieve wholeness. While his speech applied to men and women, Aristophanes knew his audience, so he told everyone that for the sake of love, they should find their own young man so that they can become one with them. He concluded, "Love does the best that can be done for the time being. He draws us toward what belongs to us. But for the future, love promises the greatest hope of all. If we treat the gods with due reverence, he will restore to us our original nature, and by healing us, he will make us blessed and happy." Once Aristophanes was finished, Eryximachus praised his speech and noted while the bar had been set high for these speeches, he had complete confidence in Agathon and Socrates because they were masters of the art of love. Socrates displayed some humility, unconvincingly so, by claiming that he was self-conscious about performing after a great speaker like Agathon. In reply to this flattery, Agathon said that Socrates was trying to fluster him by setting high expectations for his speech. The two of them nearly slipped into a classic episode of Socratic questioning, but Phaedrus noticed this and reminded Agathon that if he proceeded to answer Socrates, then they would get distracted from the task of praising love. Agathon agreed to resume discussion with Socrates later and proceeded with his speech. Agathon started off by pointing out that the other speakers have been focusing too much on the benefits of love instead of celebrating the god of love himself. Therefore, he sought to correct this by properly characterizing this deity. He stated, "While all the gods are happy, love, if I may say so without giving offense, is the happiest of them all, for he is the most beautiful and the best. His great beauty lies in this. First, Phaedrus, he is the youngest of the gods." Agathon said that the old stories about the conflict of the gods happened because of necessity instead of love. He insisted that if love had existed, there would have been peace and unity between the gods. Next, Agathon asserted that love is a delicate god. His reasoning for this was that love exists in the softest parts of a person, the soul. Love avoids bad personalities and lives within good characters. Agathon stated, "Always then, he is touching with his feet, and with the whole of himself, what is softest in the softest places. He must, therefore, be most delicate." It comes to no surprise that Agathon is into this kind of play. Furthermore, not only is love beautiful, young, and delicate, he also has a fluid, supple shape. Erotic language aside, his point was that this form allows for love to live in the soul. Agathon's gratuitous glazing over the god of love continued as he talked about his excellent skin and his preference for places with a flowery fragrance. Finally, Agathon took a break from thirsting over the god of love's beauty and moved on to praising his character. He stated, "The main point is that love is neither the cause nor the victim of any injustice. He does no wrong to gods or men, nor they to him. If anything has an effect on him, it is never by violence, for violence never touches love." Maybe Agathon is a little more vanilla than expected. He asserted that the influence of love is always given willingly, never by force. Furthermore, the god of love has significant moderation because he exhibits power over the passions by being the greatest pleasure. Love even trumps manly bravery as seen by Ares' passion for Aphrodite. Since love has power over the bravest, Agathon asserted that love is the bravest of them all. However, the logic of this praise is flawed. For example, the military commander might have power over the courageous soldier, just as love may have power over the brave, but that does not necessarily make him braver than the soldier. Next, Agathon spoke of the god of love's wisdom, or to be more specific, love's ability to teach. Like Eryximachus, Agathon honored his profession through his praise of love. Because love is such a great poet, he can influence others to become poets. Agathon extended this ability to any wide range of skills and artistic abilities. He reasoned that you can't give to another what you don't have yourself, and you can't teach what you don't know. Again, I think this logic is flawed. For example, the poetry of Dante was profoundly inspired by his love for Beatrice. However, this doesn't necessitate that she herself was a great poet. Agathon said that once love came into the picture, the infighting between the gods came to an end. He asserted that once this god was born, all goods came to gods and men alike through love of beauty. If the existence of love brought about peace on earth, this is news to me. If anything, love is often the cause of strife, as seen in Zeus's affairs with mortal women and the ensuing conflict that it caused between him and his wife Hera. In the Iliad, it was the love for a beautiful woman that led to the Trojan War, where even the gods quarreled amongst themselves. In the passion of love, peace is the exception. In summary, Agathon insisted that love is the best and most beautiful. We have love to thank for bringing beauty and goodness into the world. Agathon concluded his speech by stating, "Love fills us with togetherness and drains all of our divisiveness away. Love calls gatherings like these together. In feasts, in dances, and in ceremonies, he gives the lead. Love moves us to mildness, removes us wildness. He is giver of kindness, never to meanness. Gracious, kindly, let wise men see and gods admire. Every man should follow love, sing beautifully his hymns, and join with him in the song he sings that charms the minds of God or man." This romanticized description of love is overly optimistic, but nonetheless, Agathon offered an impressive ending to his speech. It's worth noting how Agathon's depiction of love bears a strong resemblance to his own self. This was seen earlier when he asserted that love was a great poet. Also like the god of love, he brought everyone together through hosting great festivities. Furthermore, Agathon is akin to the god of love when he inspires wise men like Socrates with his beauty and skill. Even if his tribute to love was sincere, there are undertones of self-flattery. However, this is no concern to his audience. They are greatly impressed and give Agathon a rousing applause after his speech. Socrates said that he was right to be worried about following up on Agathon's excellent performance. Eryximachus agreed about Agathon's abilities but rightfully called bullshit on Socrates being nervous. Socrates insisted that the previous speech was so captivating that he was at a loss for words. He acted regretful of his choice to participate in these speeches and took back what he said about being a master of the art of love. He then made a passive-aggressive comment regarding the other speeches by saying, "Now it appears that this is not what it is to praise anything whatever. Rather, it is to apply the object the grandest and most beautiful qualities, whether he actually has them or not. And if they are false, that is no objection, for the proposal, apparently, was that everyone here make the rest of us think that he is praising love, and not that he actually praised him." In the guise of flattery, he asserted that the others heap praise upon love without concern for the truthfulness of their words. He humbly admitted that he doesn't have the ability to follow this method of speaking. However, he offered to tell the truth his own way, so that it doesn't invite comparison with the other speeches, thereby saving him from the risk of embarrassment. The others insisted that he speak in whichever way he saw fit. Before starting his speech, Socrates received permission to have a session of philosophical questioning with Agathon. In typical fashion, Socrates probed him with a series of questions about the nature of love, in which they conclude that love cannot be beautiful because love desires beauty. Socrates' reasoning for this was that people desire what they lack. Therefore, because love desires beauty, love must be lacking beauty, which contradicts what Agathon previously said in his speech. As a result of this questioning, Agathon realized his own ignorance on this subject. Upon successfully gaslighting Agathon, Socrates concluded his questioning and moved on to his speech. He claimed to be relaying a discussion about love that he had with Diotima, a wise woman from Mantinea who taught him the art of love. Although it sounds like he smashed, we will find out that he means something quite different. Socrates said that he would take a similar approach to Agathon and first explain who love is, and then describe his impact. Socrates insisted that he once described love to Diotima just like how Agathon did in his speech, asserting that love is a beautiful and excellent god. Diotima also happened to use the same arguments that Socrates had just employed against Agathon to conclude that love is neither good nor beautiful. As a side note, although Diotima is the most authoritative voice in this dialogue, I encourage you to question this and all other arguments in this dialogue in the spirit of philosophical inquiry. The dialogue shifts to the conversation between Socrates and Diotima. Socrates was taken aback by Diotima's conclusion that love is neither good nor beautiful. He asked if that meant that love is bad and ugly. She replied by asking, "If something is not beautiful, is it necessarily ugly?" Socrates told her that he thought so. Diotima continued questioning him in a manner suspiciously similar to Socrates' own method of inquiry used in his previous speech with Agathon. She asked if one is not wise, does that mean he is ignorant? Without giving him time to respond, she also asked if he had identified what is between wisdom and ignorance. Socrates was completely clueless. Diotima explained, "It's judging things correctly without being able to give a reason." Correct judgment, of course, has this character. It is between understanding and ignorance. Socrates agreed with her. Diotima then rejected the false dichotomy that love is either beautiful or ugly, good or bad. She suggested that love could be something in between. Socrates commented on how everyone thinks that love is a great god, and she asked him to clarify if he meant literally everyone. Socrates confirmed that he did. Diotima thought it was funny and replied, "How could those who say that he is not a god at all agree that he's a great god?" Socrates asked, "Who says that?" Diotima explained that she was referring to them both, and Socrates was astonished. To explain this, Diotima started with the premise that all gods are beautiful and happy. If they are happy, they must be in possession of the good and beautiful. As for the god of love, it was mentioned earlier that love desires the good and beautiful because he lacks these qualities. So if love is in need of the good and beautiful, how could he be a god? Socrates understood her logic. He then asked whether the god of love is mortal, but Diotima said that is not so. She explained, "He is a great spirit, Socrates. Everything spiritual, you see, is in between God and mortal." Socrates asked what is the function of such spirits, and she explained, "They are messengers who shuttle back and forth between the two, conveying prayer and sacrifice from men to gods, while to men they bring commands from the gods and gifts in return for sacrifices. Spirits are between gods and men. They are the link and serve as mediators because, according to Diotima, gods don't mingle with men." Plenty of myths indicate otherwise, but we'll leave that aside. Socrates then asked who the parents of the spirit of love are, so she explained the lore. Long ago, Aphrodite was born, so the gods threw a birthday party. Poros, the personification of resourcefulness and plenty, was in attendance. Penia, the personification of poverty, was outside by the gates begging because she belonged to the streets. Poros had too much to drink and started feeling sleepy, so he went outside and passed out. Penia found him there sleeping, so she started scheming on how to get some child support. She took advantage of him while he was passed out and became pregnant with the spirit of love. Since love was conceived on Aphrodite's birthday, he is one of her followers. Because he is a child of resourcefulness and poverty, he shares similar attributes to his parents. Like his father, he is resourceful, courageous, and skillful. Taking after his mother, he is broke as fuck and living in the streets. Diotima explained that love is neither immortal or mortal because he cycles between life and death. She elaborated that love is also in between wisdom and ignorance because he knows enough to desire wisdom but not enough to be wise like the gods. Socrates then asked her who loves wisdom and is neither ignorant nor wise. She replied that lovers of wisdom are in between ignorance and wisdom. Since wisdom is beautiful, the spirit of love is also a lover of wisdom. Based on what Socrates had previously said about love, Diotima concluded that he thought love was more about being loved than being a lover. This explains why Socrates assumed love must be absolutely beautiful, since that would entail being loved. However, Diotima's description of love runs counter to his previous notions. While Socrates also feels what she has said about love is compelling, he asks her what's the purpose of love for mankind. She assured him that she'll teach him this soon. Based on what Socrates said before, love desires what is beautiful. She suggested a hypothetical scenario where someone asked them, "The lover of beautiful things has a desire. What does he desire?" Socrates replied that they become his own. Diotima said that this presents the question of what happens when the lover gets the beautiful thing that he desires, and Socrates was unable to come up with an answer. Diotima then modified the question and replaced beautiful with good. She then asked what the lover of good things desires. Socrates provided the same answer as before, that they become his own. She followed up with a similar question of what the lover will have when he obtains the good thing that he desires. In this case, the answer came more easily to Socrates, and he concluded that this lover would have happiness. Diotima replied that since possessing good things makes one happy, there is no need to ask what's the point of wanting happiness, and Socrates agreed. Regarding the desire for happiness, she asked if it's universal for people to want good things forever. Socrates answered that this is correct. Diotima then asked Socrates, "Why don't we say that everyone is in love, since everyone always loves the same things? Rather, it is more common to say that some are in love and others aren't." Socrates was curious about this himself. Diotima explained that we distinguish a special kind of love and refer to this specifically as love. On the other hand, other types of love are referred to by other names. Socrates asked her to clarify, and she provided an example. The word poetry has a wide range of uses. She said, "After all, everything that is responsible for creating something out of nothing is a kind of poetry. And so, all the creations of every craft and profession are themselves a kind of poetry, and everyone who practices a craft is a poet." This can still be seen in modern usage, where the term poetic isn't limited to actual poetry. Socrates agreed with his observation, and Diotima continued to explain that craftsmen and professionals are not called poets. We mainly reserve the word poet to refer to the creators of melodic and rhythmic words. Similarly, love refers to a specific type of love. Diotima stated that her main point is that every desire for good things or for happiness is the supreme and treacherous love in everyone. However, we don't consider everyone who pursues what they love, for example, someone in pursuit of money or fame, to be lovers, and we don't think of them as being in love. Socrates begins to understand her point. Diotima then relayed a familiar myth about lovers who seek their other halves. Despite Socrates' portrayal of this conversation as a real event, this reference to Aristophanes' speech suggests that he's taking some creative liberties, or possibly making the whole thing up, which might even be more impressive. Diotima contrasted her story by saying that in her depiction, lovers do not necessarily seek wholeness in their other half unless it's for the greater good. She made this distinction because parts of the whole might be detrimental, like a diseased leg. In such a case, one might be better off cutting that part out. She believed that people can only find happiness in possessing what is good, and insists that people can only love what is good. Even though Socrates agreed, I don't buy into this idea because there are endless cases of love for what is detrimental to oneself. Now that they've agreed that people love the good, she got his agreement that people desire to possess the good forever. Based on this, she asserted that this desire to possess the good forever is the object of love. She then asked, how do lovers pursue this object of love? He said that if he could answer this, he wouldn't be admiring her wisdom as a student. In other words, he had no idea. Diotima provided the answer to her own question. It is giving birth in beauty, whether in body or in soul. However, Socrates had no idea what she was talking about. Diotima explained, all of us are pregnant, Socrates, both in body and in soul, and as soon as we come to a certain age, we naturally desire to give birth. She rejected the notion that anyone can give birth in anything ugly, only in something beautiful. My understanding of this awkward phrasing is that she's referring to giving birth in an ugly or beautiful state of being. At first, it sounds like she's trying to say that giving birth to something ugly is impossible, and people can only give birth to what is beautiful. However, this can't be the case because there are many cases of giving birth to something ugly. Take the physical appearance of Socrates, for example. Diotima believed that birth occurs in a state of beauty because it is a godly affair. She considered it godly because procreation is a form of immortality enacted by mortals. She asserted that pregnancy and reproduction can only occur in harmony. What she means by harmony is not clear, but I doubt she's accounted for unwanted pregnancies. Nonetheless, she asserted that beauty is in harmony with the divine, without much explanation as to why this is so. Diotima stated, therefore, the goddess who presides at childbirth, she is called Moira or Eileithyia, is really beauty. It's confusing that she refers to this goddess as either Moira, commonly known as the Fates, or Eileithyia, the goddess of childbirth and midwifery. Since the Fates also preside over death, it's odd to conflate them with beauty because of their involvement in birth. The description of a goddess that's present at one's birth sounds more like Eileithyia. Also, since she is the goddess of midwifery, this parallels Socrates' self-described role as a philosophical midwife who helps others give birth to ideas. She continued to explain that those who become pregnant and give birth become more beautiful, gentle, and joyful. On the other hand, those who don't procreate are ugly because they don't bring forth what is within them and suffer as a result. I can see this rubbing off the wrong way for people who prefer to be child-free, and it seems like her depiction of pregnancy and childbirth are a bit too rosy. She claimed that the source of excitement for those who are pregnant is that birth releases them from their pain. I think it would have made more sense to say that the excitement of birth comes from the creation of new life. If someone wanted to be free of the pains of childbirth, they wouldn't have a child to begin with. Even if a mother finds relief after giving birth, the pains of carrying a child are just replaced with the struggles of raising one. These are just some counterpoints that come to mind, so I'll defer to the mothers of the world to have the final say in this. Diotima then concluded that the spirit of love doesn't want beauty. Instead, he wants reproduction and birth in beauty. However, Socrates wasn't entirely convinced. Diotima inquired upon why love would want reproduction. She asserted that this is because reproduction enables a species to exist forever, assuming all other conditions of survival are in its favor, and is the closest thing mortals get to immortality. She referred to what they said earlier about love wanting to possess the good forever. She stated, a lover must desire immortality along with the good, if what we agreed earlier was right, that love wants to possess the good forever. It follows from our argument that love must desire immortality. At this point, her depiction of love sounds quite removed from everyday experience. When in love, how many of us have our minds set upon immortality? Just because people desire to possess the object of their love for greater duration doesn't necessarily mean that they want to live forever. The illusion of immortality through reproduction is no substitute for the experience of love. We choose to love knowing full well of our own mortality and the impermanence of who and what we love. Diotima asked Socrates, what do you think causes love and desire? She explained how animals beholden to a strong desire for intercourse after giving birth will endure an extraordinary amount of suffering for the sake of their offspring. She noted that mankind accepts this because they understand its necessity. However, she asked, what causes wild animals to be in such a state of love? Once again, Socrates has no idea. Diotima explained that animals, like humans, also desire immortality, and this can only be done through reproduction. Each living thing maintains its identity throughout life, and yet each being is also in a state of flux. Every person is in a continual process of change in body and spirit. Just as we physically change throughout life, our minds change as well. This also applies to our attitudes, behaviors, and knowledge. She explained that we study to replenish the knowledge that we have forgotten. When we remember a piece of knowledge, it appears to be the same. However, knowledge is like a flowing river. While it appears to be fixed, it is continually renewed. This is akin to how mortal beings will always die but leave behind new offspring in their place. In this sense, mortals have a semblance of immortality. This is why people place such high value on their offspring. Diotima asserted that this passion for immortality is love. Socrates was amazed by Diotima's speech. She continued her explanation by pointing out to the human desire for honor. She noted how irrational this desire seems to be. However, when her conception of love and immortality are factored in, this desire for honor makes more sense. Many people desire immortality through fame, and this gives them courage. She coincidentally referred to the courage of Alcestis and Achilles, the very same examples mentioned in an earlier speech in this dialogue. Diotima explained that they wouldn't have done what they did unless they expected to be remembered. She asserted, I believe that anyone will do anything for the sake of immortal virtue and the glorious fame that follows, and the better the people, the more they will do, for they are all in love with immortality. Diotima explained that just as a person can be pregnant in body, with a desire to procreate, they can also be pregnant in soul, carrying wisdom and other virtues within them. This pregnancy of spirit can be seen in creative people like poets and craftsmen. While Diotima speaks of virtue, this is not to be conflated with the Christian virtues of modesty and meekness. The essence of virtue in this time was excellence and human flourishing. If a person is pregnant in soul from the time that he is young, once he reaches the proper age, he will desire beauty and creation. He will be drawn to beautiful souls and noble characters. If he finds such an excellent person, he gives birth to what was pregnant in his soul. He cultivates virtue. Together, he and his lover foster excellence and creativity, which is their offspring in spirit, and share a bond that is stronger than actual parents because their offspring is more beautiful and more immortal. Diotima asserted that such children of the spirit are preferable to human ones. She supported this claim by pointing out how people admire the great poets such as Homer and Hesiod for their creative achievement, in other words, their spiritual offspring, which are immortal and bring glory to their makers. Virtue is begotten through creative action. This may include the development of laws or the creation of great works of art. Such offspring of the spirit cultivates excellence and have far greater longevity than actual children. Diotima told Socrates that he has the potential to be initiated into the rites of love. However, the purpose of these rites is the ultimate mystery, and she wasn't sure whether he'd be capable of this initiation. Nonetheless, she proceeded to explain the rites of love. Her conception of love is described in progressive stages that ascends from the profane to the sacred. When the lover is young, he must start by being attracted to physical beauty. Through desiring someone with a beautiful body, if he is not led astray, he will beget beautiful ideas. Eventually, he will recognize the beauty of others and comprehend the form of beauty. In understanding beauty's universal form, he no longer only admires an individual's looks, but appreciates all who are physically beautiful. Afterwards, the lover will begin to appreciate the beauty of the soul and place greater weight on this than physical beauty. He becomes willing to love even an unattractive person so long as they have a beautiful soul. Through his relationship with people with good souls, he will give birth to such ideas as will make young men better. The outcome of this devotion to good souls will strengthen his character and extend to an appreciation of the beauty of activities and laws. At this point, he will have little concern for physical beauty. Eventually, he will move beyond appreciation for custom and begin to desire the many forms of knowledge and appreciate its beauty. The lover will no longer fixate on the singular desire of a person or activity. Diotima explained, the lover is turned to the great sea of beauty, and, gazing upon this, he gives birth to many gloriously beautiful ideas and theories, in unstinting love of wisdom, until having grown and being strengthened there, he catches sight of such knowledge. Diotima urged Socrates to pay attention to what she was about to say. She explained that if one follows this way of love, he will arrive at the goal. Such a person would witness the true beauty of love and come to understand the purpose of his journey. The lover will come to understand that the beauty of love is eternal. Furthermore, this beauty is not subjective. It isn't just beautiful from one perspective and ugly from another. Neither is this true beauty attributed to any single thing in particular, whether it be a body part or a type of knowledge. The true nature of love's beauty is always one in form, and all the other beautiful things share in that, in such a way that when those others come to be or pass away, this does not become the least bit smaller or greater, nor suffer any change. She explained that by moving through the stages of love, one will come to understand true beauty. This is the way into the mystery of love, Diotima explained. One goes always upwards for the sake of this beauty, starting from beautiful things and using them like rising stairs. The lover goes from loving the physical beauty of one, to two, to all who are beautiful. This desire develops into an appreciation for beautiful customs and then becomes a passion for learning beautiful things. As a result of this journey, he arrives in the end at this lesson, which is learning of this very beauty, so that in the end he comes to know what it is to be beautiful. According to Diotima, to live as a person who beholds true beauty is the ideal way of life. Once a person witnesses this higher form of beauty, he will no longer be beholden to things like gold, clothes, or even pretty boys. Diotima inquired upon what would happen if a person could see the true and divine form of beauty. She reminded Socrates, in that life alone, when he looks at beauty in the only way that beauty can be seen, only then will it become possible for him to give birth not to images of virtue, but to true virtue, because he is in touch with the true beauty. The person who gives birth to virtue and works diligently to cultivate it is loved by the gods. If immortality were possible, these great individuals would deserve it. Thus concludes the discussion about love with Diotima as told by Socrates. We return to the Symposium, where Socrates closed his speech by saying that he was persuaded by her words on love. He concluded, "That's why I say that every man should honor love, why I honor the rights of love myself, and practice them with special diligence, and why I commend them to others. Now and always, I praise the power and courage of love, so far as I am able. Consider this speech then, Phaedrus, if you wish, a speech in praise of love." The ending of Socrates' speech was met with great applause. Suddenly, the applause for Socrates was disrupted by a loud group of frat bros. Agathon sent his slaves to check who they were and instructed them to only invite these people if they were familiar. Soon afterwards, they heard the drunken yelling of Alcibiades, a promising young politician and military strategist who demanded to see Agathon. The flute girl, along with some of Alcibiades' friends, helped carry him into the party. Alcibiades greeted the guys at the Symposium, told them that he was lit, and asked to join the party. Alcibiades proceeded to flirt with Agathon and offered him a flower crown because he felt that Agathon was the most handsome and clever person. The other attendees thought this was hilarious, and Alcibiades pleaded to join the festivities. The others were greatly excited by Alcibiades' presence and welcomed him to the party. Agathon brought him over to take a seat by his side. The others helped to bring the drunken Alcibiades over while he struggled to take off his flower crown. And as he was doing so, he accidentally pushed it over his eyes and was unable to see Socrates making room on the same couch. Once Alcibiades managed to get seated next to Agathon, unknowingly besides Socrates, he started getting zesty with Agathon, kissed him, and put a flower crown on his head. Agathon told his slave that he wanted to fit 3 on the couch, and Alcibiades asked who the third person was. He then turned around and, to his dismay, saw Socrates. Alcibiades jumped out of his seat and started to lose his shit. He exclaimed, "Good lord, what's going on here? It's Socrates. You've trapped me again. You always do this to me. All of a sudden, you'll turn up out of nowhere where I least expect you." He interrogated Socrates about his intentions and why he was on this couch. Alcibiades was pissed that Socrates found his way next to Agathon, the most attractive man at the party. As if this situation wasn't ridiculous enough, Socrates then pleaded with Agathon to protect him from Alcibiades. Socrates exclaimed, "You can't imagine what it's like to be in love with him. From the very first moment he realized how I felt about him, he hasn't allowed me to say 2 words to anybody else. What am I saying? I can't so much as look at an attractive man, but he flies into a jealous rage." Alcibiades cried out that he would never forgive Socrates, and that Socrates would pay for what he had done. Alcibiades had an urgent matter to attend to. He proceeded to make a flower crown for Socrates since he thought that trouble would ensue if Socrates was not appeased. He then turned to the rest of the attendees and told them that they were way too sober and pressed them to drink more. He declared himself as master of ceremonies and requested Agathon to bring him a wine cooler to drink from. The slaves filled the wine cooler with over 2 quarts of wine, and Alcibiades downed the drink. He then asked them to fill it up again for Socrates. However, Alcibiades admitted that it wouldn't do much because Socrates was an absolute tank who had never been seen drunk no matter how much he had to drink. The slaves proceeded to fill the wine cooler. As Socrates was chugging the wine, Eryximachus, being the sophisticated doctor that he was, told Alcibiades that it was uncivilized to simply binge drink without conversation or singing. Eryximachus asked Alcibiades if he had any suggestions on what to do. Alcibiades deferred to Eryximachus because he was a doctor, so his exceptional mind should be able to come up with a prescription. Eryximachus explained that earlier they were taking turns giving speeches in praise of love. Since Alcibiades hadn't given a speech yet, Eryximachus insisted that he take his turn, despite his drunken state. Eryximachus proposed that once Alcibiades finished his speech, he would come up with another topic for Socrates to take up so that they could continue with another series of speeches. Alcibiades thought that it would be unfair that his speech, performed under the influence, would be compared with everyone else's sober speeches. He then complained, "I hope you didn't believe a single word Socrates said. The truth is just the opposite. He's the one who will most surely beat me up if I dare praise anyone else in his presence, even a god." Socrates took offense to these allegations and told him to watch his mouth. Alcibiades insisted that there would be no way that he'd praise anyone with Socrates around. Eryximachus, putting his PhD to good use, suggested that Alcibiades present a speech in praise of Socrates instead. Alcibiades entertained the idea of using a speech to punish Socrates in front of everyone. Socrates asked Alcibiades if he intended to speak for the sake of slandering him. In response, Alcibiades insisted that he would only tell the truth. Socrates is satisfied with this condition, so he allowed him to proceed. To give Socrates greater assurance, Alcibiades proposed that if he say anything incorrect, Socrates would be allowed to interrupt and correct him. Alcibiades admitted that his upcoming speech might have some mistakes because he was so drunk. Nonetheless, he was adamant about not lying in his account of Socrates. Alcibiades started his praise of Socrates by saying that he looked like a statue of Silenus, a mythological figure that was a friend and teacher to Dionysus. He insisted that Socrates also looked like the satyr musician Marsyas. Since I had no idea what Silenus or Marsyas looked like, I searched online for some pictures, and it turns out that Alcibiades was pretty spot on about the resemblance to Silenus, and to a lesser extent Marsyas, due to his more variable depictions. Alcibiades suggested that the resemblance goes further than mere appearance. First, he called Socrates impudent, contemptuous, and vile. However, he did not explain the connection to the aforementioned mythological figures. Next, he said that Socrates was quite the flute player, and was even better than Marsyas the musician because Socrates was proficient with the pipe, without any need for a flute. While Marsyas's divine flute skills have in themselves the power to possess, and so reveal those people who are ready for the god and his mysteries, Socrates had this effect on people without the use of instruments. He inspired people with his words. Alcibiades explained, "Let anyone, man, woman, or child, listen to you, or even to a poor account of what you say, and we all are transported, completely possessed." Despite Alcibiades' grudge, he was unable to make an honest account of Socrates without attesting to his greatness. The words of Socrates were so compelling to Alcibiades that he still felt their effects during his own speech. Alcibiades explained that when he hears Socrates speak, he becomes overwhelmed with passion. His heart begins to pound, and tears start streaming down his face. He was not alone in this type of response, and attested to others being similarly affected. Despite being hurt by whatever Socrates might have done to him, he still expressed deep admiration for the philosopher. Alcibiades said, "But nothing like this ever happens to me. They never upset me so deeply that my very own soul started protesting that my life, was no better than the most miserable slaves. He makes it seem that my life isn't worth living." Such a reaction shouldn't be foreign to any earnest student of philosophy. Upon an encounter with Socrates, the student forever remembers his challenge to live consciously because, as Socrates said elsewhere, the unexamined life is not worth living. One can either accept this call to pursue wisdom or turn away as Alcibiades does. Alcibiades felt trapped because Socrates' greatness diminishes the significance of his own political career. In the presence of Socrates, Alcibiades realized that he had neglected what mattered most, developing his character and overcoming his own weakness. Therefore, he rejected Socrates and the examined life to continue living in ignorance. Alcibiades told everyone that Socrates was the only person who could make him feel ashamed. When away from Socrates, he slipped back into his old self and reverted into being a people-pleaser. Alcibiades wanted to stay away from Socrates because when faced with such a great man, all of his personal deficiencies come to light, and this overwhelming insecurity became too much for him to bear. He even admitted that he previously gave Socrates his word to live a better way of life, so he felt ashamed of his failure to do so. Alcibiades went as far as saying that he would be happier if Socrates was dead, but admitted that he would suffer even more if that were to happen. Alcibiades said, "I can't live with him, and I can't live without him. What can I do about him?" Poor Alcibiades was down bad. Alcibiades said that this was the intoxicating effect that Socrates had on himself and others. Furthermore, he asserted that Socrates possessed even more extraordinary powers that he will attest to. He intended to expose Socrates. Alcibiades claimed that Socrates was obsessed with beautiful boys. This was to no one's surprise. Like Da Vinci, Shakespeare, and Michael Jackson, Socrates was an unparalleled genius who happened to have a strong interest in younger guys. Alcibiades asserted that Socrates made the deceptive claim about being ignorant. He insisted that this was mere pretense, and the truth was that he was a sober and temperate man. Even in his effort to shame Socrates, he ended up praising him instead. Alcibiades then stated that Socrates couldn't care less if a boy was beautiful, which appears to contradict his previous claim about how crazy Socrates was about beautiful boys. Socrates held little regard for physical beauty, money, or fame. Alcibiades went as far as to claim, "He considers all these possessions beneath contempt, and that's exactly how he considers all of us as well." When in public, Socrates put on a facade and played a game of irony. According to Alcibiades, there was much more behind his mask. He was more serious than he had let on. Alcibiades said, "I once caught him when he was open like Silenus statues, and I had a glimpse of the figures he keeps hidden within. They were so godlike, so bright and beautiful, so utterly amazing that I no longer had a choice. I just had to do whatever he told me." Alcibiades was certain that Socrates wanted him. Since he was confident in his looks, Alcibiades assumed that all he had to do was let Socrates smash, and then he would get to learn everything from the philosopher. His body was ready. All Alcibiades needed was some alone time with Socrates. One day, Alcibiades got his chance, and they were finally alone together. He thought that in this situation, Socrates would make his move, but nothing happened. They simply had a conversation and Socrates went his way. Alcibiades wasn't willing to give up yet. He continued to scheme his way into Socrates' pants. His next idea was to invite Socrates to the gym. Although they wrestled for several rounds while no one was there, Alcibiades didn't score this time either. Despite failing yet again, he was determined to run them cheeks. He decided that a more direct approach was needed. This time he invited Socrates to dinner. The first time Socrates came over for dinner, he ended up leaving right after his meal and Alcibiades was too timid to stop him. The second time around, Alcibiades made sure to start a conversation just before finishing their meal so Socrates would stay longer. Once Socrates was prepared to leave, Alcibiades insisted that he stay the night because it was too late. This worked out, and Socrates proceeded to lie on the couch. Back at the Symposium, Alcibiades told his listeners that the wine was making him honest in his speech. He asked rhetorically, would it be fair to Socrates for me to praise him, and yet fail to reveal one of his proudest accomplishments? Alcibiades likened his grievance to a snakebite and said that he was willing to open up about it to his fellow victims since only they could truly understand. Alcibiades told the audience, "Something much more painful than a snakebite has bitten me in my most sensitive part. I mean my heart, or my soul, or whatever you want to call it, which has been struck and bitten by philosophy, whose grip on young and eager souls is much more vicious than a viper's and makes them do the most amazing things." He insisted that he and the fellow attendees, including Socrates, have all shared in the madness, the Bacchic frenzy of philosophy. This was why he thought that they would understand and excuse him for his behavior. Alcibiades returned to his story about Socrates. The lights were off, and it was just the two of them. Finally, it was time to make his move. Alcibiades asked Socrates if he was asleep and confirmed he was not. He then asked if Socrates knew what had been on his mind. Socrates wasn't sure. Then, Alcibiades told Socrates that he was the only worthy lover he ever had. He offered Socrates anything and everything to win him over. Alcibiades said, "Nothing is more important to me than becoming the best man I can be, and no one can help me more than you to reach that aim." Socrates replied, "Dear Alcibiades, if you are right in what you say about me, you are already more accomplished than you think. If I really have in me the power to make you a better person, then you can see in me a beauty that is really beyond description, and makes your own remarkable good looks pale in comparison." However, Socrates questioned whether this would be a fair exchange. Alcibiades merely offered the appearance of beauty and expected Socrates to provide true beauty in return. Socrates said that Alcibiades might be wrong about how beneficial such a relationship with him would be. He told Alcibiades, the mind's sight becomes sharp only when the body's eyes go past their prime, and you are still a good long time away from that. Alcibiades didn't seem to put much thought into Socrates' words and told him that he had nothing more to say, and that it was up to Socrates to decide on their relationship. Socrates replied, "You are right about that. In the future, let's consider things together. We'll always do what seems the best for the two of us." Based on Socrates' positive response, Alcibiades assumed that he had finally secured the bag. He wasted no time, went over to Socrates' side, and slid underneath his cloak to place his arm around him, spending the whole night by his side. To his listeners at the party, Alcibiades cried, "In spite of all my efforts, this hopelessly arrogant, this unbelievably insolent man, he turned me down. He spurned my beauty, of which I was so proud. Members of the jury, for this is really what you are. You are here to sit in judgment of Socrates' amazing arrogance and pride." Alcibiades was extremely bitter. He thought he was going to Pound Town, but was banished into the friend zone. After getting blue-balled by Socrates, Alcibiades was absolutely humiliated. However, he also confessed, "I couldn't help admiring his natural character, his moderation, his fortitude. Here was a man whose strength and wisdom went beyond my wildest dreams." Because of this, he couldn't bring himself to truly hate Socrates or lose him as a friend. He despaired that he no longer had any purpose and likened his torment to slavery. There really is no salvation for a simp. Alcibiades shifted topics and began to recount a few stories of their time in the military which demonstrate the greatness of Socrates. During a military campaign, they were cut off from their supplies, but Socrates endured hunger better than all his fellow soldiers. Furthermore, he could easily endure the coldest weather, and once went outside when it was freezing and was just chilling barefoot in his light cloak. On occasions when they had drinks, Socrates could outdrink everyone. By all accounts, Socrates was just built different. Although Alcibiades was recognized for his bravery in this military campaign, he was actually saved by Socrates in battle. When Alcibiades was wounded, Socrates refused to leave him behind and even retrieved his armor as well. Alcibiades was transparent about this act of bravery, but regardless, the generals awarded him due to his social status. Even so, Alcibiades had noticed that Socrates was happy for him. During their time in the military, they had a grueling retreat from Delium. Alcibiades was on horseback, and Socrates was a foot soldier. Despite being on foot amidst this excruciating situation, Socrates was completely calm. He carefully observed his fellow troops and looked out for enemies. Alcibiades acknowledged that this was a testament to Socrates' bravery. Anyone who can stay calm and vigilant in the midst of chaos is a force to be reckoned with. After recounting these stories, Alcibiades insisted that there was much more that could be said to attest to Socrates' greatness. Although Socrates had some achievements in common with others, Alcibiades said, "As a whole, he is unique. He is like no one else in the past and no one in the present. This is by far the most amazing thing about him. Other great men, whether they be warriors, artists, or rulers, can be compared to their peers. However, Socrates is without parallel." Alcibiades expressed that although Socrates is a strange man, there is no denying his greatness. Alcibiades could only compare him to the mythical Silenus and the satyrs. He said that their resemblance extended further to Socrates' style of argument and ideas, which were ridiculous at the surface and sometimes vulgar like the satyrs. Alcibiades continued, "But if you see them when they are opened up like the statues, if you go behind their surface, you'll realize that no other arguments make sense. They are truly worthy of a god, bursting with figures of virtue inside. They're of the greatest importance for anyone who wants to become a truly good man." Thus concluded Alcibiades' praise of Socrates. Although his speech was full of the spite of a spurned lover, he was open about his deep admiration for the philosopher. Nonetheless, Alcibiades reminded everyone of Socrates' deceptive nature. According to Alcibiades, he acts like a lover, but casts a spell on his target to make them fall in love with him. Alcibiades brought this up as a warning to Agathon to not allow himself to be seduced by Socrates. Many of the attendees found Alcibiades' speech to be hilarious. It was obvious that he was still down bad for Socrates. In reply to the speech, Socrates called out Alcibiades for trying to homewreck him and Agathon. He asserted that Alcibiades had concealed his true motive until the very end. Socrates insisted that Alcibiades was a jealous lover, and pleaded to Agathon not to let this get in the way of their bromance. Agathon replied that he was starting to realize that Socrates was correct and went over to lie with him. Alcibiades cried out, "How I suffer in his hands! He kicks me when I'm down. He never lets me go. Come, don't be selfish, Socrates. At least let's compromise. Let Agathon lie down between us. As jealous as he might have been, at least he was down to share. Socrates said that they couldn't get too zesty yet because it was his turn to praise the person to his right. So if Agathon moved in between them, Socrates would be praised all over again. Instead, Socrates intended to praise Agathon, who was thrilled at the idea, so he readily agreed. Alcibiades was fed up with Socrates stealing all the pretty guys. Nonetheless, Socrates kept getting away with it. Suddenly, a group of drunk and rowdy hooligans crashed the party. Upon their arrival, the Symposium devolved into a frat party and most everyone proceeded to binge drink. Eryximachus, Phaedrus, and the other lightweights knew they wouldn't be able to hang if they stayed any longer, so they made their way out. Aristodemus, the attendee who had relayed this story, ended up passing out. When he finally woke up, he saw the others had either left or were sound asleep. The only ones still awake were Agathon, Aristophanes, and Socrates. They were sharing a large cup amongst themselves. While Aristodemus was still a little groggy, he managed to understand that Socrates was trying to prove to them that authors should be able to write both comedy and tragedy. The skillful tragic dramatist should also be a comic poet. Although he was clearly making his point, the others were in no condition to understand his reasoning, and they passed out shortly afterwards, leaving Socrates as the last man standing. What exactly was Socrates getting at in this discussion about tragedy and comedy in the conclusion of the Symposium? One can only guess considering the missing context. Nonetheless, I think we can understand a broader idea of mastery over two creative practices by considering the example of Plato. Through his dialogues, Plato demonstrates his mastery over philosophy and literature. In Plato's works, there isn't an arbitrary divide between art and rationality. He displays excellence across both domains. This idea of mastering different forms parallels Socrates' assertion that the true poet should excel at both tragedy and comedy. I wouldn't be surprised if Plato felt that he had surpassed the tragic and comic poets. Like Socrates, Plato placed himself in competition with the most prominent speakers, thinkers, and artists of his time. He wanted to beat them at their own game. The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche observed that the form of the dialogue enabled Plato to compete against rivals across many areas of expertise. In one of his posthumously published fragments, Nietzsche imagined Plato saying, "Look, I too can do what my great rivals can do. Indeed, I can do it better than they. No Protagoras has invented myths as beautiful as mine. No dramatist such a vivid and captivating whole as my Symposium. No orator has written orations like those in my Gorgias. And now I repudiate all this entirely and condemn all imitative art. Only the contest made me a poet, a sophist, an orator." This competitive element can be seen throughout the Symposium. Underneath the camaraderie and festivities, there is a subtle rivalry between the speakers over who can present the greatest account of love. The Symposium can be seen as a contest, and it is Socrates who comes out on top. Just as Socrates outperformed the tragedian Agathon, the comic poet Aristophanes, and all the others in speeches and drinking, Plato displays his creative superiority through his philosophical dialogues. To this day, no one has surpassed him. The great body of work that Plato left behind stands as a testament to his love and admiration for his teacher Socrates. Throughout the Symposium, we see how powerful emotions and experiences can compel people to change their lives. Over the course of many speeches, we hear a variety of perspectives about the extraordinary influence of love. In Alcibiades' speech, we witness the agony of a man who has denied the call to live an examined life. Due to Alcibiades' failure in cultivating his character and his decision to prioritize political power, he feels judged by the ideal that he sees embodied in Socrates. As a result, his love and admiration for Socrates turns into spite and misery. It is all too human to fail when challenged by your greatest ideal. The radiance of what you admire most can feel blinding and lead you to turn away in resignation, but there is always another choice. This sentiment reminds me of a poem by Rainer Maria Rilke titled Archaic Torso of Apollo, which I'll recite in full. We cannot know his legendary head, with eyes like ripening fruit, and yet his torso is still suffused with brilliance from inside, like a lamp in which his gaze, now turned to low, gleams in all its power. Otherwise the curved breast could not dazzle you so, nor could a smile run through the placid hips and thighs to that dark corner where procreation flared. Otherwise, this stone would seem defaced beneath the translucent cascade of the shoulders and would not glisten like a wild beast's fur, would not, from all the borders of itself, bursts like a star. For here, there is no place that does not see you. You must change your life. This statue of Apollo, as described by the poet, emanates with power and splendor. Nothing essential has been lost in the passage of time. This worn-down and headless statue continues to address its viewer with the authority of a god. Rilke was captivated by its features, which are intensified by his boundless imagination. Regarding Rilke and this poem, the philosopher Walter Kaufmann states, Rilke does not react with resignation, irony, or humor, let alone romantic nostalgia. To him, the archaic torso is a work of art and a human achievement, rather than a symbol of an irretrievable past. When experiencing the great works of the past, we may deceive ourselves into thinking that such excellence is no longer possible in our time. Since we've been bestowed with a plethora of wonderful remnants of the past, we may be lulled into a complacent humility and resign ourselves to passively consuming what came before. However, we must open ourselves to truly listen to what these great works have to say to us. We might come to realize that despite coming from vastly different times and cultures, their humanity is nothing foreign to ourselves. When we hear what they have to say, we shouldn't fall into the trap of longing for the past and wishing to turn back time. Instead, we can be inspired by what came before and accept the challenge to become more than who we have been. Just as Rilke was confronted with the torso of Apollo, we are faced with the magnificent character of Socrates. Rather than use his powers to preach dogma, Socrates taught others to inquire. He didn't take advantage of his skills for personal gain. Rather, he urged his students to cultivate their character and live examined lives. His dedication to philosophy would lead him to trial and execution. Socrates left no works of his own. However, we have Plato to thank for capturing the spirit of his character in dialogues. While Plato surely took some creative liberties in his many depictions of Socrates, he managed to capture the essence of what made him so great. Thus, the spirit of Socrates lives on within countless students of philosophy to this day. Philosophy and art, at their best, presents you with a challenge. They evoke within you an overflow of passion and the urge to create. They present you with visions of who you could be and fill you with aspirations for a greater way of life. They open your eyes to the vast possibilities of human existence. Although they are represented in different forms, at their core they share a common message. You must change your life.